like almost nothing else in the country. It's really an amazing, amazing program for undergraduates that brings world-renowned writers to our campus. We are also lucky that Peter Trias decided to endow this fund for us. So thank you to him, to the English department, to Africana Studies, Spanish and Hispanic Studies, the Provost's office. These are all groups that have co-sponsored this event and have kind of gotten on board with it. As always, Sue Gage, my wonderfully fantastic assistant, without whom everything would have fallen apart tonight, and the entire semester long. Thank you, Sue. And the bookstore, thank you, Brian, for always coming out and selling books of our fabulous writers. And of course, Chris Abani, who is our Trias Writer-in-Residence this semester, who we're extremely lucky to have, and he is the person who is going to introduce our actual leader. So, Chris Abani.
Good evening. I know it's cold. Good evening.
Good evening.
Much better. I like that I get applause just for standing up. But at my age, you know, you kind of, I think I earned it, right? So I usually start with dirty jokes, but not tonight. I thought I'd start, before I introduce Adrian, by reading one of Adrian's poems to you that embodies things you'll hear in this introduction about his relationship to West Africa, to Yoruba, to Cuba, to the Dominican Republic, to America. And you will see echoes of William Carlos Williams and others. It's called Direct Perception at the Forest. So much depends upon the bank forming a river and river forming a bank. The red rooster courting the marble hen, island sprouting in the middle like new love. You must not cling to its bank fearfully, moldy turtles slipping away from hollow roots, formless in the end, free. In much the same way that Derek Walcott is attempting to create a national identity for the multiracial, multicultural, and the many multiplicities of the Caribbean through his poetry, Adrian Castro is in pursuit of history, but not one that seeks to be locked down into a national identity the way Walcott seems to be in pursuit of, but rather one that allows for an organic and ever-expanding sense of the self. A self that, unlike Walcott, roots itself firmly in West Africa, in Yoruba and Efik pasts, and then spreads out in a ripple to cover the world. Born of Dominican and Cuban parents in the United States, Adrian Castro is unique in the sense of Caribbean and American letters. He is in many ways firmly American and yet so truly cosmopolitan that his work and life push the limits of what we think of being American. Adrian says of himself that while trying to articulate the Afro-Caribbean American identity, he honors myth and history, while approaching everything with a truly interdisciplinary mindset. This interdisciplinary approach is evident in his own life. He is a poet, a scholar with degrees in psychology, a doctor of Chinese medicine, an Ifa priest versed in the old Yoruba theology, and an artist himself. And he collaborates with musicians, with painters, and with other poets to create truly ways to push the envelope back for the work we make. Adrian Castro's latest collection, Hand in Destiny, includes the poem Itutu Sankofa, 2003, written for the memory of the Afro-Cuban jazz percussionist Ramon Mongo Santa Maria. In this poem, Castro writes, "You keep flying forward, Sankofa-like, looking back into history at us, your people. This Sankofa, the bird who flies forward while looking at history, is at the heart of his poetics. The Sankofa bird is at the heart of Ghanaian art and poetics. It's a bird that has its head turned back, and it means that you carry your history always forward. In order to understand your present and your future, you must always carry your past with you." Victor Hernandez Cruz says this of Adrian's poetry: "This is the Caribbean opened up, the details of the interior, a Caribbean projection realized. From Cantos to Blood and Honey, to his second book, Wise Fish, Tales in 6/8 Time, and into Hand in Destiny, Castro continues realizing Sankofa-like, giving substance to the diasporic experience of his community. Doing so, he often returns to his source, West Africa. You hear these lines: 4 hours north of Lagos, still gaping, hungry roads muddy, potholes like snares the size of slavery, large like revenge. In the procession of history, oral tradition, poetry, and music are one and the same. The drum beat and percussion serve as mnemonic devices. This is why the music stays with the people, even as it has changed with time and distance from the source. Today, jazz is dancing to shekere and bata rhythms. That's from one of his poems. As poet, he is a vessel like the percussive shekere god and a vessel of historical knowledge. As Ifa priest of Babalawo, he is concerned with the community's spiritual well-being, although it can be said that the concerns of the poet and the Babalawo are not mutually exclusive categories. He does so by bringing a bridge between deities and people, history and the moment, interpreting the mystery always through his incredible poetics. His engagement with William Carlos Williams in his book revealed a true and evolving understanding of America. Of Williams, he says, Williams is one of the first truly American poets, in addition to, say, Whitman, in the sense that he incorporated that truly pluralistic notion of America. He used Spanish. He was part Puerto Rican Spanish on his mother's side, I didn't know that. Science, he was a medical doctor. Emerging art forms and movements, objectivism, anti-surrealism, anti-imagism in his work. And most importantly, place played a vital role in his work. For me, this is still Castro speaking, that section, actually no, that's me speaking now. for me, that section of the book that we're talking about is a tribute of sorts to an ancestor. When we think of ancestors, what happens in the kind of cosmopolitan world that we live in is that we can no longer think only in terms of direct lineages, but artistic lineages that span all over the world. It gives the reader an inkling from where these poems spring and to where they may eventually follow. To a large extent, the poems that follow are very much a rejection or a reaction, maybe perhaps, to objectivism, and lean in the opposite direction. But as well, they're about place, both geographical and imaginary, and if you're in class today, you will know exactly what we're talking about. Adrian is certainly all this and more. I met Adrian many years ago while we were both teaching workshops at the Central Program up in Port Townsend. He was wearing a Yoruba outfit, and when I met him, I actually thought he was a Nigerian. His Yoruba is better than mine. It was really an interesting week, and it would be a week that heralded the beginning of a strong and unbreakable friendship. We would grow close as peers, reading each other's work and helping each other push back the boundaries so that we can move a craft forward that is not just individual but collective in this sense. But even more than that, Adrian Castro carries all of our histories with a very easy grace. Poet, writer, and artist, Adrian Castro was born in Miami, Florida. His work combines Afro-Caribbean myths, history, and rhythms to explore Afro-Caribbean American identity. He is the author of 3 collections of poetry. I'm repeating this just so you know what books to buy. Cantos of Blood and Honey, Wise Fish, Tales in 6/8 Time, and Handling Destiny. The New York Times has praised Castro's poetry as a serious and seriously enjoyable contribution to our flourishing Latino literature. He's a recipient of the Cintas Fellowship and Eric Matthew King Award from the Academy of American Poets, a USA Knight Fellowship Fellow. Castro has taught at the University of Miami, Miami-Dade College, and Florida International University. Please give that truly generous welcome that HWX knows how to do to Adrian Castro.
Wow. Thank you, Nifade, for that wonderful introduction. Well, good evening, and thank you for thank you for inviting me here to this campus and giving this opportunity to read you some poems and discuss some of these ideas the next half hour or so. I want to read just a couple of poems to give you kind of a survey. Can you hear me back there? Yeah. Give you a little bit of a survey of some of my work and then some newer stuff. And maybe we can afterwards do like a Q&A. And hopefully we'll get a dialogue going. I'll start with some poems from Wise Fish, which was my second book. And I haven't really prepared a order, so I'm going to improvise it. One time I did a reading once with Victor Hernandez Cruz, And if anybody don't know who he is, he's a wonderful, wonderful, great poet, Puerto Rican poet, who was one of my really strong mentors. And so we went on a book tour together. And I remember we did this just reading together, and this was in front of nearly 1,000 people. And we did this kind of tag team poetry. And when it was his turn to read, he would just get the book and go. And that's the poem he would read. Because he wanted to make it, a little bit more spontaneous. I guess after doing a tour, you kind of get tired of reading the same thing over and over and over again. So I'm going to read this poem, which I haven't read in quite a while, and it's entitled "A New Atlas." And so there's several words in here that are not words; they're sounds, and then there are words that some of you may not be familiar with. But if you buy the book, there's a dictionary in the back of the book of all these books. But for your ears, areito is the court where Taino Indians played a game called areito. So it was areito, the game was called areito, and then the field was also called areito. And in the Taino language, the Tainos were the Aboriginal people of the Caribbean prior to Columbus bumping into the Bahamas. And then there's another word in Efik and another word in Yoruba. The Efik is Aserekwe Munyongwefu, and the Yoruba is Iyalode Alate Oni, which in Efik it is the name of a particular men's society lodge, of which my great-grandfather was the head of, and in Cuba, by the way, not in Calabar. And in Iyalode Alate Oni means referring to a very important woman who has a crown of honey. Okay. So, a new atlas. Ding will always follow in the bellows of hymns. If our rhythm is to continue, when we flap with a lip and a flip away from the source. Not only flamenco corners, not only areito plazas, not only Aserekwe Munyongwefu, not only Iyalode Alate Oni crown of honey, but the chatter of hands, but the toss of piropos, but the bustle of waves and the splash of voices, dum dum, criollo, dum dum, criollo. The thing will always follow tutum. In the cauldron of rhythms, we begin to blend impressions, tú con cubano, we with Boricua, Afro con America, Santo con Domingo. They said some machetes could clear routes, could root a new identity strung with bilingual links of iron. They said, pour a pint of palm oil, slaughter a bottle of aguardiente, spray a black rooster above the links. They said even the machete también would have to dance, también sharp and slippery. The thing will always follow tutum. We forge incantations, tones laced with the history of Monte Adentro. The jungle becomes our cohort. Through these hymns we remove fallen trunks like lifting hollow figs, like this has secretly been the method. Three gourds plunge from their source, each speak with a slight nasal whistle. Oye, Maria, we got yo, poco más pa'lante, you'll find ese river. Rio that has the root, the thought, like water, oracle to spill it, herb to spiritize it, stone to memorize it. Welcome to the home of wise fish who will read the wet letters writ with cowries, who will chant the links of the traditions. So that was unmadness. Let me go to okay. True story. True story. This poem is called Cross the Water. True story. When I met Chris at Port Townsend, 2009. So we were doing a reading together. And this is an auditorium. And so this poem actually takes place in a place very close to where Chris is from, in Nigeria. In 1999, I was commissioned to write the script for a documentary about a masquerades called, in Nigeria it's called Ekwe, but in Cuba it's called Ekwe. And so it was a documentary about this cross-fertilization that occurred. And so we took film from Cuba of the Ekwe dancers in Cuba to these people in Hobart, in southeast Nigeria. And so the documentary was about this mixture, this happening, this collaboration. And I got to meet a lot of these members. And my connection was that my great-grandfather was the second in command in one of these societies. His title was called Mokongo. And this is in Cuba. But in Calabar, they still have that title for the second in command of a particular section, a particular lodge, a particular fraternity. And but in Nigeria it's called Ekongo in Calabar. In the Efik language, it's called Ekongo. So you see the similarity. One's called Mokongo, the other Ekongo. So, long story short, so I decided to read this poem in honor of Chris. And as I was starting to read the poem, as I was doing some invocations, all the lights went out. And so I kept reading because, what are you going to do? The lights all of a sudden go out, everything just goes dark, the whole auditorium was pitch black. And luckily I remembered some of the poem, and so I just kept on going, and then finally they were able to bring the lights up. But what was interesting was that they were recording the whole reading, and of course, as the electricity went out, that part also went out. So they missed that part of the invocation. It was not recorded. Is anybody recording this? No.
Right here.
So I'm gonna try to turn off the lights. Let's see if we can. So this is across the river. We're doing a scientific experiment here. See if it can be repeated. Cross the river. I'd like to dedicate this to my good friend Chris Abani. Bange, bange, mboko, bokon boko, bokongbe, what she saw, spotted, prancing, able to pounce among the lushness, cascading trails trenching newly crossed water. In those days, far before Oyibo traded palm oil for salt, gunpowder for slaves, before Asibome Kondo erected ebony totem over red earth at Obuton. Its friction echoed a guttural speech, Neneke. In those days, Neneke spotted majestic motion, paws with rings of raffia and neck with rings of raffia, tail ringing a sonorous call like Enkanika. That's the name for a bell that the masquerade wears in its back. Both in Calabar and Nigeria, both places, the masquerade wears a bell in the back, and that bell is called Enkanika in both places. And so the masquerade, when it's moving around, does this, and so the bell sounds, boom, it sounds like a cowbell. Boom, 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 boom. So, so the musicians kind of imitate this bell also as well, and they call that same bell Enkanika. Tail ringing a sonorous call like Enkanika, enticing fish to come and play. Bell which oriented dispersed ones across water. When Ekwe dances at Usagari, she ripples across the bank above Cross River, meandering like veins on young paws, weaning. When Ekwe dances in Calabar, twigs of akoko in hand, still above water. The night, the right and left arm and leg crisscross, alternating forward, the shoulders inching forward, masked, wide-eyed, with staff sensing its way like whiskers, hiding in deep ambush, never divulging where her children sleep, while her children dress in secret cloth, while the growl becomes visual, while Bonko and Chemiya, their Kuchiyerema, the echo of goat skins on skin, their growl becomes visual. Ekwe dances in Calabar, her children dressed in Ukara cloth tied secretly indigo dye, written with abstract paws. They arrive in hollow trunk, draped in palm fronds to signal sacred. The Congo, topped with brim hat, pours libation of gin on the stone riverbank, while the growl becomes visual. Though they say across the river, Ekwe cannot cross water. Ekwe dances in regla también, riding the body magic, insipidity they say, if you can read gesture. Like Mokongo used to, topped with brim hat, drinking hot drink, a blade of raffia circling his neck, gold tooth glistening. The story will sing forever, deep, across water, beyond geography, into the lushness of history. Back. The drum actually sounds like that, a little bit like that. So the drum, when they play it, it sounds like a leopard. And that leopard is the sound of Ekwe. It goes, and you can hear that. You think that it's just a little drum going, and you can hear that blocks away. You can hear it down the street. And it's in a little room that only a couple people have access to. But the way they make that sound, which is, you don't know how to do it. I don't know how they do it because that's their secret of that society, how they make that sound. You hear that sound down the street and it sounds like something out of this world, which it is out of this world. So, okay, so that's from Whitefish. Any questions so far? Any comments? Anybody? Maybe that.
I see that the time the lights went up is when you would do the electrical, and if you try to push it really hard. Sorry, man.
Yeah, not gonna happen.
No, they have too much strong, powerful medicine.
They have powerful medicine here. Very. Okay, so. Alright. So since Chris mentioned something about this poem, the Tutu Sankofa, I'll read that one. You know, I have to confess something to you. Just out of habit, I've been trying to, I tried to start doing this reading without my glasses. And I realized that as I'm reading, I said, why am I reading this without glasses? When I can, you know, luckily I know some of these poems pretty well, but why not just be giving you a random poem altogether? So let me put on my glasses. Tutu Sankofa, 2003, for the memory of Mongo Santa Maria. So let me introduce this poem a little bit, because this is like, what did you just say? 2003, I heard something in 2003, but what was everything else? Okay. So the tutu means, it's a Yoruba word, and it means, it's a ritual that is done for purifying, for purification. It's a ritual that is done to atone. Okay? It's also part of a ritual that is done when someone dies. Although strictly speaking in Yoruba it's called Isiku, but some people call it Itutu as well, because the Isiku itself is an Itutu. And Sankofa, as Chris mentioned, is a bird, it's a legendary bird from the Ghanaian culture, from the Akan culture, that this particular bird flies with its head turned back. So it flies forward while looking back at history. And so this poem is dedicated for the memory of Mongo Santa Maria. Anybody know who Mongo Santa Maria was? Aha, there we go. Yeah, everybody with gray hair. Oh, the Mongo Santa Maria. The crystal, I know Mongo Santa Maria. Well, I got gray hairs. So, I'll tell you a little bit about Mongo Santa Maria. Mongo Santa Maria was a conga player, Cuban. And he was one of the first conga players, not the first, but one of the first, to come to the United States. He came in the 50s to the United States and joined up, started playing jazz with different jazz musicians. And soon he went out on his own, and 1960, I think, he made his own first record. I think it was called Watermelon then. And so, and then he went on to create several classics of jazz that were Latin jazz, actually. And one of them is, Jesus, I'm spacing the name of the, Afro Blue. Afro Blue, which John Coltrane did a version of it. A lot of people have done versions, but now the original was done by Mongo Santa Maria, Afro Blue. And very few people know that that melody from Afro Blue comes from a song praising an Orisha by the name of Obatala. And the melody, I don't know if it might ring a bell, I'll try to kind of hum it. Da 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 da. Anybody that might ring a bell to some people? So the song goes. The melody of the song is da 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 da. You hear the similarity? Baba funuru ereleu okayen lejibu ele let it out. So kind of a little bit, you know. So it comes from that particular melody. So anyway, Mongo Santa Maria passed, and I was lucky enough that I was asked to read at his wake, read a poem at his wake. And so I went to the burial, and they wanted to, it wasn't at the wake, it was at the burial they wanted me to read. They wanted to have some drummers playing, and they wanted me to be there to read some poems while they're bringing the casket down into the earth. So, you know, that's a way to go, you know. With drummers playing rumba and, you know, a poet reading some poems as they're lowering the casket. So, so we did that, and as I was leaving, I happened to look down on the floor, and I find a red parrot feather. From an African gray parrot. Now, African gray parrots do not fly loose in Miami. They fly in Miami, but in people's houses. They're not flying around in Miami. And so the only thing I can think of is that somebody had that parrot feather on them, and they dropped it there at the cemetery. But being a poet, no, I thought it was something else. You know? So I instantly picked it up and said, "Oh man, this is a sign from Mongo. Hey, thanks for reading the poem." You know. And so I still have that parrot feather, and it's actually in where I have my bata drums. It's together with where I have all my bata drums. So. Itutu Sankofa 2003 for the memory of Mongo Santa Maria. Okay. There will be people, they said back in January, that will leave us, depart while looking back at their people. They said, travelers from afar, we will see each other again. One crisp, a melodic conga solo, even while casket being lowered, after 83 years of flying forward, Sankofa-like, bird who flies while looking at history. Beginning when Afro Blue, inspired from a chant praising Obatala, deep in the din of echoes in Jesus Maria La Habana. Sounds that permeated cloth walls of El Barrio's history of Central de Azúcar, Café, Tabaco, like the scent of sopa de quimbombo, bollitos de carita, acarajé. Proclaiming their scent through the Baroque streets, you flying forward while looking at history. In the time of Watermelon Man, you leaped through lines your new country was not willing to cross. You with golden rope of Santa Barbara hanging from your neck, entwined in glass beads and sweat, thunder rolling from caramelo hands, celebrating how man is man. La clave no tiene color, mi hermano, said your drum-stained hands, Mongo, when they lowered la caja, your last dance to a young rumbero's llanto, the goatskin's lament praising how you look back into history, flying forward. A faint solo begins to play now, deep in el otro mundo. Only you can now chorus the response. Kind of the music you hear on tufts of clouds. Your quiet chorus now echoes here, where many mimic your rhythm. Lying by your casket was a red feather from African gray parrot, symbol of messenger. Though we're not in Cuba anymore, we're not in Africa anymore, still a red feather to chorus your response. You keep flying forward, Sankofa-like, looking back into history at us, your people. Okay, and I think I'm going to read some newer poems now.
Adrian, ¿tú conoces Mongo los Mongo have a record entitled Dawn?
Dawn?
Amanecer?
Amanecer. I don't know. don't know.
Because I think he has a tribute there, actually a farewell to Chano Pozo.
Really? Yeah, that's
I've seen
incredible.
him in New York.
Yeah, right. Chano Pozo came back. Chano Pozo came to New York in the 40s, right? You know, before he did, he came in the 50s. But he was, yeah. But you know, Chano Pozo died very quickly after he got to New York. I don't know actually. I don't know because you know he had a lot of recordings.
Check it out. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Gone. So I'm going to read some newer poems, which I think are quite different from what you've been hearing so far. And this is from my last book that is not published yet, but hopefully will be published soon. And that book's called The Alchemist's Notebook. The Society of Whalers. There is no preparation for whaling. Suddenly, from the earth's intestines, just below your navel, sorrow is engulfed in sound. Not because a torrent washed away the house helplessly, your wife took your friend as a lover, your teachers have taught you nothing true. You keep trying to distance the emblems of treason. You bear their weight. When you forget, you remind yourself there is something to be sad about. The way a bird walks resigned into a cage. Yet they become calcinated, powdered by time. You are a member of the Society of Whalers, not because once again you are left alone. Mostly, your children are doubtful of you. Their bleached bones line the road, leading towards a house atop a hill, overlooking their vast efforts at suicide. Work song number 3, The Wealth That Surrounds Us. Any W.B. Yeats fans here? Yeats? Okay, all right. So you're gonna pick up I'll tell you the story afterwards. Kind of makes more sense afterwards. Work song 3, The Wealth That Surrounds Us. I will arise and go. Tonight I will go before the white scrim everyone talks about. Not only because it's strenuous, like clay that clumps like honey on bare feet, or because I have the marks on my skin they search for like a passport. In another land where the old folks dwell, knowing is where old folks dwell. Red dirt is well worn into grooves the way words embed themselves into action. A road flanked by bleached skulls of perfidy leads to a chalk house by a crystal lake, a peaceful place atop a hill. They make it sacred by their acts of deep insight, the art of a rainbow, the strength of mercy. If you are awake today, they say you must know your father. If I am awake, I will uphold my father's tradition of building temples from leaves, water, and lightning, of cutting open the flesh to peer at the lush bush inside. It is, after all, what leopards do. Olainka, son of Oboyi, crouched before a white scrim long ago, poised to preserve his father's work in the tradition of slicing the subtle from the coarse. I give thanks to Olainka. I must go now. Go and grip the cutlass my father left me. If I am awake tomorrow, then tonight I am him. Hopefully you got the Yeats in there. You know, it's from, it takes off from Naked Industry.
Could you read it like Yeats though?
Okay.
That kind of nasal, analyze.
I will arise and go tonight. No. So, the story behind this is as I was writing this poem, a friend of mine, very good, great poet, lives in Miami, named by Campbell McGrath, was organizing a reading with the idea of the poets that were reading to show poems that are influenced by other poets. That was the theme. I was already working on this poem. And so he had called me out of the blue, and I said, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And so I said, wow, okay, what poem am I going to read? And so Yeats is one of my favorite poets. So I happened to get a book, one of Yeats' selected poems, and I happened to just open the book. It was in the first quarter of the book, and Lake of Innisfree was the poem I happened to open to. And as I'm reading the poem, I said, Jesus Christ, this is what I'm writing.
Yeats ripped me off.
What a plagiarism! You know, and so I'm writing this poem. This poem was already, I'm working on it. Pretty much most of the poem's already written. I'm just kind of, editing and working through it or whatever. And so I open this book, open it, and right into it. And I start reading. I said, I can't believe this. Look what I have just done. I've copied this guy, and I haven't read this poem in 12, 15 years or something. But it was still in there somehow. At least the rhythm of that was still in there. And it shows up, and I said, here we go. I got the poem I want to read at this thing. And I read this poem anyways. So this is the poem that it turned out, but of course, it's about two completely different things. And what do we got here? Oh, sheesh. Okay, last poem. I'm going to finish with a newer poem. And this is commissioned for an anthology about Latino art. There's a collection that's going along, making its way around the country, and I was asked to write a poem about any piece in the collection, and I chose this one particular photograph by a photographer by the name of, his last name is Ken Gonzalez, and the photograph is called "At Daylight the Miserable Man Was Carried to an Oak." So these photographs are about late 1800s California, different trees where people were hung. And the people that were hung were Mexicans, Latinos, and Asians. They were hung from these trees for no other reason other than they were Mexican or Asian. And so what he did is he took these pictures of these pictures, and then he deleted the bodies hanging. And so the pictures were just of all the people congregating around these trees, looking at something in the tree. But of course, he has doctored the pictures, so there's no body hanging from the tree. And so this one particular picture was really riveting, and so I wrote this poem about it, or what I see, anyways. This is called "Father Above, Mother Below the Hanging Tree." The tyrant, tall and useless in youth, searched the soil to explain his bitterness, A boy who slept among skinny, bony branches, his eyes sour like bile. Nobody would recall his date of birth, but the day he was found hanging by his feet, the bloody cloth of disrespect dripping, his last breath fanning the mossy trunk. By all accounts, it was a memorable day. A crisp morning in Northern California, the moss dripping its diamonds upon the earth. The town that never recovered from the scorched gold mines, now entrusted to memory. Everyone blames them now. These last ones who arrived barely clothed, with feathered hats covering their naked dreams. The town's tyrants huddle like vultures and whisper their despotic victory, because even they have shame. Everyone huddled agreed it was a memorable day. The boy's father climbed another oak because his misery could fit nowhere else, rather than watch the helpless spectacle, arms outstretched as if to embrace his boy. His son's arms, stiff and stretched forward, as if the boy thought, alas, the earth was going to catch him. Thank you. We've got a few minutes for a Q&A. Any questions, any comments? Yes?
How do you develop rhythm poems? Because I noticed today in reading that and another piece that you don't use punctuation, you only use line breaks and sentence breaks to develop rhythms. How do you go about deciding how that sort of works?
It's a good question. The breath. The breath in music. I've listened to a lot of music, and anybody who wants to write poetry, wants to write period, but specifically poetry, needs to have a good ear for language and for rhythm. Whatever that rhythm is, my particular rhythm happens to be a bit more percussive, but it doesn't have to be that way, So I use, sometimes I use thoughts as line breaks. Sometimes I use a translated thought as a line break. Sometimes I use just an image as a line break. Sometimes I use just the sound as a line break. And so as I write aloud. I don't write, I don't write, in silence. As I'm writing, I read aloud, so I hear myself. For the first part of a lot of poems in Wise Fish, this is why it's called Tales in 6/8 time, because the 6/8 rhythm is. That's one way of playing it, but that's essentially the 6/8 beat. Right. So what I did for a lot of those poems is I had a cowbell next to me and a stick, and I was composing in the 6/8 rhythm. So I was playing it and writing to that rhythm. So the line breaks were. That's the rhythm, trying to follow that rhythm. I gave it up because the poems were starting to sound very predictable and very cardboardy, very stiff. Believe it or not, here I am trying to make it sound like music, but they started becoming very predictable and stiff. So I kind of gave it up, but I started writing all these poems like that. my point being, there's different ways of establishing rhythm, you know, and that's what you have to find that own ear, and you know, everybody has to find that their own ear. But certainly you have to listen to a lot of music, and I think it helps a lot to be able to read your own stuff aloud. And where does it break? You know, what is the rhythm of it? And if you don't find a rhythm in it, you got a problem, because it has to have a rhythm, because language is rhythm. And if it's dead, if it's cardboardy, if it's tin, it's metallic, then it, you know, it's not coming alive. It lacks rhythm. Anybody, any other questions?
So you start poems with rhythm, or you start those poems. This is in Henry Desmond.
Wise fish.
Oh, wise fish. Oh, because I was thinking, I read a bunch of the poems with my intro-career writing class from Handling Destiny, and it seems like they often start really densely rhythmic, and then they move at the end to like they almost step to the side of the poem and have this like expansive gesture. So how do you, if you start poems like that, how do you end poems?
That's a good question. You know, sometimes I stop home and I don't have anything else to say. That's it. I have nothing else to say about this, you know. And sometimes I say, this is getting really long. You know, and so I need to get to the point again. You know, have you said everything you want to say without repeating yourself over and over? And then sometimes it's a bit more organic, you know, and it's, so the shape that a poem takes is, for me, only happens by its sound. So that shape, the sound of it as I'm reading it dictates everything. That to me is primordial. That is the most important thing, what it sounds like. That's my first, even if I have a good image, if it doesn't sound right, you know, I'll change, I'll do something with it. And so sometimes that sound is very wordy, so the line is very long. And sometimes that sound is short. So that's really what determines. I don't really mind if it's skinny or if it's wide or not, you know. What I mind more is the pace and this, you know, and what it sounds like. Any other questions? Yes.
So I just was wondering, your poems end like with a sound or just with a really interesting ending. What are some like pieces of advice that for people that are like learning how to write poems in a creative sense? Like, what is some advice of not to end a poem?
Oh, how not to end the poem? Oh, wow. Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to answer that. There's a lot of ways. I think that the ending has to just kind of come, you know. How not to end a poem is to force it to end. That's one way of not ending it. It's like, okay, I'm gonna stop it now. I have to stop this, you know, because I want to stop it, you know, because I feel like I gotta stop it, you know. Just, you know, now you can make, once you develop some level of skill, you can make an editorial decision, okay, but that's because you've developed a certain level of skill that you're able to just say, okay, I can stop this here without it sounding like I just cut it off, you know. But I think that probably the safest way is for it to be organic, you know, for it to come to its natural end.
No, because I really like your endings. Like, they're just like, I want more.
Yeah.
You just ended it.
Right, thank you.
And
But
it's interesting because I'm also in the creative writing class with Professor Coles, and learning how to write poetry in that sense, where you don't want to force it, but you kind of have to. That's like very difficult.
Yeah.
So I was just curious as to
Yeah.
how to do that.
Yeah, so, you know, sometimes, you know, a lot of it depends on your subject matter. It depends on the type of poem you're writing too, you know. But all those things inform how it begins, you know, and it informs where the poem is going to go. But I think a poem has to, for it to work, it has to really end on its own. You know, you can't make it end, because then it sounds forced. You know, it will. You'll hear someone say, "Wow, I really liked everything I was saying. You know, this and that," but what happened? You know, it just all of a sudden it just stopped. What happened? You know, well, that might be because it didn't come to a natural end. You know. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
If it's not too personal, what was the origin of the first poem?
The first poem.
No, I mean,
The new one.
any poem, the first time that you wrote poetry.
Oh, the very first poem I wrote. What was the inspiration?
What was the source? Where did it come from?
Oh, it was a bird I heard singing at about 4 o'clock in the morning. And it occurred to me that, why is the bird singing at night? Why do birds have to, I thought birds only sing in the daytime. Apparently there's some that don't. And furthermore, later on in my life and in my spiritual development, I realized that some of those things are not birds. They sound like birds, but they're not birds. And I think that that's what I was hearing that night.
How old were you?
19. It was 1986. 1986.
So again, sound.
Talent, yeah. Yeah, you know, a lot of people ask me if I'm a musician. I don't. Although Chris said I look really good with a sax.
It's true.
I look good with a sax.
But not great.
Can't play with squat,
But you play percussion.
but I play some percussion, you know, and I'm completely self-taught, you know, with percussion. But I have listened to a lot of percussive music, especially Cuban and Afro-Cuban music, and I mean, many years of listening to that and trying to really internalize that rhythm, because I really wanted to do that. I wanted to internalize that particular beat, you know, the clave beat. Which is a little different than, it's a little different than that. You know, that's almost like blues, you know, but that's like guaguancó, that's more like yambu, but you know, it's like rumba beat, so, which is like much more rootsy, percussive music. So, siento una voz que me dice, ay, siento una voz que me llama. A little bit of a rumba, a little yambu. Yeah.
Almost the way reggae goes.
Yeah, because it's actually on the upbeat as opposed to downbeat. It starts at, so it's not, when it comes down, it doesn't start there, it starts on the upbeat, which took me a hell of a long time to figure out. You know, because I would, you know, I would sing at drummings and stuff like that. I would sing ritual songs, and I kept getting this problem that when I would come in, I would come in behind, until somebody said, "You're coming in on the downbeat." Somebody who was a musician explained that to me. Nobody else could, because these people are ritual musicians. They're not, You know, they don't explain in those terms. They just tell you, you're coming in wrong. You know, you're coming in wrong. You're coming in wrong. And then one guy was a musician said, you're coming in on the downbeat. You gotta come in on the upbeat. What? Okay, there you go. That solved the problem. You know, so now I'm just coming on the upbeat, which is really so much about African music. You know, like that is it's not so much on the downbeat. A lot of it is on the upbeat, actually. Certainly ritual music. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.